Hey guys, welcome to Wedio Academy. My name's Gabriel and I'm a colorist. Today I'm going to be covering the basics of color grading, essential techniques of color grading, in addition to how to get a job as a colorist. I hope you guys enjoy it. Color grading and color correction are a little bit different. I've always seen color correction as, that first pass. When you get the dailies in, you go in, you change the white balance, you make sure everything looks where the whites look white, and you adjust the contrast, and you don't really go into the secondary color grade. And that's where I see the difference. Color grading is really when you get into localized corrections or localized changes, and you do it for more of a creative outcome, more of a creative purpose. So with the color correction, you're really just doing stuff that will translate over between softwares. But for the color grade, you're looking at sticking in one software like DaVinci Resolve or Assimilate Scratch, and then using power windows or keying to localize that the color and tone that you're looking for. Some of the biggest tenets of color grading, in my opinion, are contrast, saturation, and hue, in addition to localization. Contrast is your overall feel of the image. Changing the contrast will change how your viewers feel. A high contrast piece could be like a war scene or some kind of boxing match or something where you really want to amp up the drama. You want to make the audience feel like they're missing some details, and it really does have an effect on how people feel. Saturation, in my opinion, is sort of next in line because contrast does affect saturation. If you go up or down in a tone, in a value scale, in terms of you have black at the bottom, white at the top, and all the steps in between, as you go towards the middle, you gain more saturation. So adjusting the contrast does in turn affect the saturation, and it does affect the color, which is pretty interesting. But saturation is also another tool for changing how people feel. You can desaturate an image and see, people will feel like something's missing. You can oversaturate it and have a dreamy scene. Can't oversaturate it too much or you start losing information, but that's where I feel like saturation sits. And then hue is the next piece, because you can, as a colorist, really go in and change the hue of your image. You can go in and change the color of a wall. You can take all gray walls and make them white. You can take all gray walls and make them yellow. You can do a lot. So hue is really more of in my opinion, sort of a corrective approach. You can change the colors to look the way they're supposed to look or the way you want, or you can use it creatively to make them look the way you want them to look, in addition to the other tools of saturation and contrast. Localization to me is a big deal as well, because that is really your biggest tool as a colorist. You can do the overarching broad grade, but then you want to go in and really use power windows or a keying where you pick one color and you adjust one color, or you pick one tonal value and you adjust that value, and then you can use windows or masks to get in there and really fine-tune what is changing. So localization is a huge tool and it's so important. So that's why I put that in there as well. Those are the biggest tenets of color grading, according to me. Who is a colorist? I'm a colorist. Anyone can be a colorist if they learn the software and they understand the basics. DaVinci Resolve is free. It's available, and there's so much knowledge out there that people are sharing, including this masterclass. A colorist in the pipeline is the person who gets the cut at the very end, typically, and they are going to ideally sit with the director of photography, or they're going to sit with the director, or both, and just have those conversations of how do you want to make this feel? How do you want this to look? And you're there to help them. You're the steward for this commercial, feature film, short film, music video, whatever it is. You're there to help someone else achieve their vision, and also include your own ideas in there too. So you're really carrying it along, and you're the last person in line next to the audio mixer and master engineer who's going to be doing that in tandem with you. So you are sort of the last line of defense to make sure everything comes out looking creatively the way it's supposed to. So how do you get to be a colorist? You know, everyone has different paths. Me personally, I went to film school. I happened to walk by an editor working on something in a different class, and I saw some of the scopes that you see in the corner when people are working on color grading. So I saw a vector scope, I saw a waveform monitor, and probably a parade, an RGB parade. And I thought, wow, that looks really cool. It's so scientific and interesting, and I kind of want to know more about that. And I didn't pursue it until later on, when some footage came back for a short film I was directing that was wrong white balance. No one I knew wanted to or could fix it, and so I said, okay, I'm just gonna hop on lynda.com, learn about color grading, or color correction I should say, in Premiere at the time, which was a long time ago, and just get the basics. And I really got an understanding of, this is where you start, this is what you should be looking for, this is what the image should look like if you want it to look good. Sort of the basics. And from there, I came to each job that I had, sort of started wanting to work in production as a DP or director, really gained a lot of experience along those lines in college, learning about lighting and learning about directing, and learning very little about post-production because I wasn't really interested in it. But when I started working, I started being put in a position where that was what I was there to do. I would go and help on a shoot, but I would spend the majority of my time in an office, in an edit suite, just working on random stuff that no one else really wanted to do or had time to do, or whatever it was. I was there to help. So I started really getting pushed into post-production and learned a lot about it just through being around it and doing it. Had access to a great color suite. I got to learn about calibration, I got to learn about color spaces, all the basic things you need to know to be a colorist. And that was my path. So my first real color grading job was coming into an agency as an assistant editor. And that was kind of my job, just an assistant editor. But through conversations I had with my boss, he began to understand, like, hey, this guy actually knows a little bit about color grading. He seems knowledgeable, and let's give it a shot. There was no harm done for me to spend some time on the three spots we had out at that time that we were working on. So I did, and he liked it. And it just went from there, where I started working on more projects, I started getting more experience, and it really came down to the fact that someone gave me a chance, which is hard to come by. If you are coming into color grading outside of an agency or outside of an environment where, the work is plentiful and you can work on it in your spare time or whatever, it's gonna be a lot harder if you're a freelancer. But what you can do is, I hate to say work for free, but you can at least work on some shorter projects that won't take a crazy amount of time and just get some of that experience. It's all about your demo reel at the end of the day. People want to see your work. If it's not the demo reel, it's the finished pieces, but they have to know that you can do what you say you can do. So you have to really be able to back up. You have to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. So if you want to be a colorist, you have to start coloring. And if you're a freelancer, that's really unfortunate, because you have to work for free and you have to gain experience. But if you're in an agency or a production company where there's a little more freedom and you have access to the gear, then you can do more there, and you can do it while you're getting paid a salary. Bottom line, if you want to be a colorist and that's a passion for you, then you just have to do it. You have to gain the experience and you have to have the portfolio. So workflow is a big topic. It's a really big deal to me. I've really built a lot of my career on being able to move quickly, and workflow is a huge part of that. You have to know how your footage is getting from A to Z, and A being capture, Z being delivery. As a colorist, workflow is one of your best friends. It's a key part of bringing the footage from the editing software into your program. So if you're working in DaVinci Resolve, you can take a locked cut and bring it into Resolve and conform it. Now what a conform is basically an editor will usually be cutting in a proxy format. So they're using that workflow to speed up their editing. They're not going to be cutting 8K. They might be cutting 4K, but you can take those intermediate files, bring them into Resolve, and conform them back to the raw media. So you basically have the same edits, but you're now using the full 4K, 6K, 8K footage at the highest resolution where you're going to get the color to look the best it possibly can. You have the most data to work with from there. So being able to accurately bring an edit from a different software into Resolve, it's a key part of being a colorist. I came to color grading coming from a production side focus first, so I was really on the capture side of the process, so I really understood a lot about cameras. I understood a lot about raw formats and media and how you're shooting. And one of my jobs, I basically was the DP, so I'd shoot the project, I'd put it on the computer, I'd edit it in a proxy format, so I was using ProRes usually, and then I would bring it into Resolve when I was ready to color. So I really handled it from that capture, and then I took it to Resolve, got it back into Premiere, and then delivered it with Audio Master, with the Color Master, and just made sure everything went where it was supposed to go and looked the best it possibly could. So maintaining the fidelity of your footage, that's a huge part of the colorist's job. You can look at workflow as a tool to speed things up. The faster you are at conforming your footage, the faster you're going to get that out the door. If it takes you 2 days to conform, no one's going to hire you. No one's going to want you to color because you're taking too long. If you can do it in an hour for a 30-second spot, if you can do it in 15 minutes for a 30-second spot, people are going to like that. It's a huge part of speeding up the process. So workflow is your best friend. You want to learn as much as you can about codecs. You want to learn as much as you can about the software, about using an XML to bring a cut from Premiere into Resolve, from Avid into Resolve, which wouldn't be an XML, so you got to learn a little bit about that. You really want to learn your delivery formats. That's a big part of your workflow. So you're exporting out of Resolve in a high quality, visually lossless codec, and you have to figure out which one you need to use. If you're going to Avid, you're going to want to do DNX HR. If you're going to Premiere, I like to use ProRes. If you're on a Mac, that's easy, but if you're on a PC, it's a little harder. So you have to figure out what your workflow is. You have to figure out in advance, and you have to execute it. I put color theory second on my list because I feel like workflow is more important, but color theory is at least a very, very close second, if not of equal importance. Color theory is your tool to get the footage where it's supposed to go. It's also the way you want the footage to look. An example of using color theory in your work is if the white balance is off, if it's, say, a little too blue, then you know using color theory that if you push the image towards orange, it's going to balance that into a white. Those colors are opposite sides of the color wheel, and that's why they do that. If you want to have a color scheme in your footage, if you want to say do a, early 2000s blockbuster look, then you can push the highlights a little warmer, and you can push the skin tones nice and orange skin tones, and then you can push the shadows towards teal, because those are on opposite sides of the spectrum. It's very visually pleasing, or it can be. Those are the tools for color theory, and that's why you want to learn it. You want to tune your eye to color theory. You want to have it just in the back of your mind all the time. When you're starting out as a colorist, you really want to learn how to develop your eye for contrasts, and Contrast goes a long way. Contrast really is sort of the basis for how your image feels. If you have a high contrast scene, maybe you really crush the blacks and whites so that there's no detail in them. That could be a war scene. It'll add tension. In addition to some of the camera techniques that might have been used, you can use contrast as another technique. If you have a low contrast look, then you can really use that to have like a dreamy kind of dream sequence, or maybe a faded film 70s vibe, or whatever you want that to be. Maybe it's a flashback. That is what you can use contrast as a tool to do. In terms of developing your eye for contrast, I use a tool called the zone system, which is not something you can buy, but it is just it's more of a theory. It's just a way of quantifying contrast. So you have 10 zones. Zone 10 is pure white. Zone 1 is black. Zone 5 is 18% gray. So every time you hit another zone, you're either halving or doubling the amount of light that's in the scene. So it's using stops like you would in a camera, like an f-stop. So if you're at a zone 6 with skin tone, that's a little bright. If you're at a zone 4 with skin tone, that's a little dark. And you can basically use this as a checklist of, have I covered all my zones? If you're afraid of pushing contrast, you can ask yourself, where's my zone 10? Have I lost a lot of detail here, or is this just a small piece of the image? And that might be where you want it. You can ask yourself, where's my zone 1? Where's the black part of the image? Where are my midtones? The zone system is a way for you to check things off as you're coloring. If you're a little scared of pushing contrast, which a lot of new colorists are, you can use the zone system to help you work through that and figure out where the tonality of the scene is. The best way to learn about the zone system is to read the book The Negative by Ansel Adams. He really gets into it. It's actually something that he came up with. But if you don't have that kind of time or that kind of money, you can go to rondexter.com, and he's got a couple of write-ups about the zone system for video. It's just a great way to understand what should the contrast look like for just a purely nice looking image, and how can you use the contrast for your own creative control. A necessary task for a colorist is to keep up with the trends, the changes in workflow, in cameras, in codecs, anything having to do with image capture and delivery. You want to understand what's new. You want to know what's changing so you can change with it. A great way to do this is just to get online. I'm usually on No Film School or Pro Video Coalition or Red Shark News. Those are some great outlets for just new things happening. A newsletter that's really good is Patrick Inhofer's Tao of Color newsletter. I would highly recommend that. You get it every Sunday. It's a nice Sunday read, and it's just pulling all those articles together to see what's happening. Things change all the time, and it's up to you to be on top of that so you don't get left behind. So you can keep getting the work, and you can keep impressing people with how fast you can get things done, because you know the fastest way to do it since you've kept up with it. You are interested in color grading and you want to know, can I make a living off this? The answer is probably. It depends where you're working. Every market's going to be different. Cost of living is going to be different. If you are working for yourself, it's going to be different than if you're working for an agency or a production company. The average salary for a colorist in 2021 was $45K a year. For some people, that's great. For some people, that's not enough. For me personally, I've always worked as a colorist in addition to other roles. I've been hired as a DP/editor/colorist/finisher. I've done it all, and those were all within the same role. So for me, I wouldn't say that I've been a colorist full-time or that I can make a living on being a colorist, because I've always done it in addition to other things. If you go on your own, if you're a freelancer, rates vary across the board based on your experience. I know that a lot of people charge between $1,200 and $2,000 a day. Some high-end shops will charge $5K a day. It just depends on your experience, it depends on your gear, and it depends on who you know. My advice, if you want to be a colorist, is to learn everything about a lot of different jobs. Also be an editor. Those two go really hand in hand. Or also be a DP/colorist. Those go hand in hand as well, since you are maintaining creative control of the footage. That being said, there are some high-end shops that hire colorists exclusively, but that's pretty uncommon. That's really just the best of the best. For most production companies, people are going to be doing other things as well. And that's just the nature of working in advertising. Why is coloring important is a really good question. If you want your work to look good, you're going to want a colorist to color it. And that's just the nature of digital filmmaking in the 21st century. You know, most cameras are shooting log formats. So you're getting footage that is low contrast by design. It's low saturation by design. It's how it's been manufactured to shoot. And that's so you can preserve the detail and hand it to someone like me, a colorist. And they can take that and they can push it any direction you want. Having that capability of being able to change just about anything in that image, depending on a lot of things, but pretty much just about anything in the image, that's a huge factor in getting it out the door. Some might say it's a necessity in getting it out the door. Anyone is capable of shooting in a Rec 709 color space, having it look pretty darn good, and exporting that, delivering that. But it's half the job. It's not what it could be. And if you're interested in really bringing out the potential in your footage, then you're going to want a colorist to do it. Some of the most important things I've learned over the years, things that you really only get from experience, is just understanding the necessity of speed. You know, there just isn't time for anything anymore. If you get a job, there's usually a timetable that's reasonable if you're quick. The faster you get, the happier people will be. And hopefully you're able to manage that so you're not always working at a high speed, because you don't want to get burnt out. And that's the second part of that, just a really important piece of color grading, or just any thing about filmmaking, is really be careful not to burn yourself out. I love filmmaking. I love film. Does not love me. Okay, even though I'm passionate about it, I still have to take care of myself. And I have a responsibility to myself to do that. If you're constantly working, if you're not taking care of yourself, or if you have a family at home and you're not taking care of them, or just being available for the people in your life, then you're really doing yourself a disservice, and there's not going to be the reward that you might think there would be. Do your best to be a people person. It's really easy to be an asshole, but you have to come at people with the best intentions, because they're coming at you with best intentions. Even if they make your job a little harder, or they don't know, be a teacher, be a steward, help people help you, and that will always be rewarded in really solid relationships. The film industry, the advertising industry, whatever it is, it's all built on relationships. So don't be an asshole. That's a big one. Be sure to take breaks. That's for color grading in particular, that's a big deal, because your eyes will tune into pretty much whatever they've been looking at. So if you've been looking at a screen for a while, your color balance might be off, your internal color balance. So take a walk, get outside, do something else for a minute. You need to reset your brain. You need to reset your eyes. You owe that to yourself, and you owe that to the work. Try to remember that you're doing this because you love it. When you stop loving it, something's wrong. That's a warning sign of being burnt out. So do what you have to do to make sure that this is the right thing for you. If you're miserable in doing your job, it'll reflect in your work, and it also will make you miserable. So do yourself a favor and check in and just ask yourself, do I still love this? And if the answer is yes, keep doing it. And if it's not, just think about it and figure out what you have to do to get back to that. It's important to think of yourself as a steward for the work. Don't take feedback personally. Really don't take anything personally. Usually it's not about you. Almost always it's never about you. So whatever it is, don't take it personally. It's not about you. Do your best to help other people and just get the job done in a way that works for everybody. There is no shortcut to greatness. You have to put in the time. You have to work on a lot. You need to get in 10,000 hours. That is a necessity. Keep expanding your knowledge. Do that through experience. Do that through reading. Do that through watching tutorials. Do whatever you have to. If color grading is a passion for you and you want to be great, you have to do the work. Don't forget about the basics. Always come back to the color theory. Come back to the zone system. Look at your image, take a step back and say, what should this look like? If you want to be great, always remember the basics. When you get into a color grading software, you have so many tools, but the most important tool to use are the basic ones, and everything else from there is really built up on those basic tools. You have to look at the image as a whole. Don't get caught up in these tiny details. Maybe it's a little off, maybe it's not. But when you really just hyper focus on something and try to find the right tool and spend hours on something that's just not working, it's never going to work and you're going to deliver late. So always go back to the basics. Those basic tools are your number one asset. Your color theory is your number one asset. From there, sure, trends happen, they come and go. Sometimes colorists do this, sometimes colorists do that. Something colorists did 5 years ago, they might be doing again. Sometimes you'll emulate film, but those things come and go. The theory never changes. One of the biggest mistakes, I would say, is not using scopes or a calibrated monitor. You might trust your eye, but your eye's not calibrated. Your eyes are constantly changing, and if you haven't calibrated your monitor, if you're not looking at your scopes, your white balance could be totally off, either in the monitor or in your own eyes. You have to know what you're looking at, and the only way to do that is to use the scopes and to use your monitor. Always be sure to manage expectations. It's a super big deal. You don't want to make promises that you can't keep. And one of the ways to do that is to set milestones in a reasonable time. One of the worst things you can do is say, yeah, I'll have it done by tomorrow. And then something goes wrong, your hard drive crashes, your computer crashes, you break your foot, whatever. You know, some people will understand that. Some people have already made promises to other people. Manage those expectations. Give yourself more time than you need, because you never know what's going to come up. It's always a hot topic when you're asking which is the best software to use. You know, in my personal opinion, I find DaVinci Resolve to be really good, especially since they've incorporated very good editing tools. They've incorporated very good audio tools. And of course, they've maintained and improved upon their colorist tools. So, you know, for me, based on the fact that it's not crazy expensive, it's really pretty industry standard for a lot of people. There's a lot of knowledge out there, a lot of community. DaVinci Resolve would be my software. That's what I would recommend for the beginner who needs something for free, and for the expert who knows what they're doing. There are other tools out there. I don't know very much about them, but there's Baselight, there's Assimilate Scratch, there's Mystica. I've used Assimilate Scratch a long time ago, maybe 8 years ago, and it was tough. It was not very user-friendly for me. I didn't understand it, and I just had a really hard time. That could just be a me thing. The company where I used it, the person who used it the most really loved it. He preferred it. So, you know, it's definitely a tool that is there for people to use. At the time, it was also cost prohibitive. That may have changed. I haven't looked. The important thing to remember is if you invest your time in one software for color, then that's pretty much going to be your go-to, because as you start building your systems, it's not like editing where you can jump around from software to software to software with a basic system. You are really building out your hardware around that software. So if you're building a Resolve system, you are buying Blackmagic output boxes, you're buying Blackmagic scopes. You're buying a lot of Blackmagic things to make it work. You might even be getting a Blackmagic color panel, and that's great, you know, but you are very much investing in your software, and it can be quite a bit of money, so choose wisely. A lot of people work in Premiere and use the color correction in that, but the Lumetri color panel really isn't for grading. Even though you can do secondary keying and you can do some semblance of windows or masking, it's not nearly as quick or powerful as DaVinci Resolve or any of the other color grading specific softwares. So I really consider that more of a color correction based software. It's really an editing software, and I use it for editing every day, but it's not the best for color grading. It's pretty good for color correction. There are a bunch of skills that are really necessary for you to be a colorist. Starting off, really understanding the hardware and the software. You are going to need a computer that can handle full res footage. There's really no way around that. And so you have to know what's the best computer to get. You're gonna get an iMac, or you're gonna get a Mac Pro, or you're gonna get a MacBook Pro? Are you going to get a PC? Are you going to make your own? Are you going to buy a gaming laptop? I have a gaming laptop for side projects. I have a iMac Pro for my day job. You know, I know what I can get away with because I know the hardware. I know what I need. And if I need something more, I know exactly what to look for. In addition to the computer, you are also going to have to know about monitors. If a camera and a lens and lighting, basically cinematography, is a paintbrush, then your monitor is your canvas. You need to know what the work is going to look like across a multitude of devices wherever it's going to be shown. So for me, I work in broadcast or digital distribution, so it's usually on a computer or a phone. I look for a monitor that can show 100% Rec 709, and I look for a monitor that I can color calibrate in the monitor using a colorimeter like this. A lot of people will get a high-end monitor that costs $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, but for me, since I know what I need, I can use a consumer monitor that costs a lot less and get very similar results, if not virtually the same, considering most people view these videos on non-calibrated devices. But essentially, you want to start in the middle. You want to start at a calibrated place so that wherever it goes, the people who are watching it are going to have a consistent experience across videos. I have for years used like a Dreamcolor HP monitor, which was great, and it went to broadcast really well. I colored a couple indie films on it, and those translated for a theatrical color space well. It's just a matter of knowing what your monitor is, knowing what it's capable of, and using it accordingly, and of course calibrating it. Now I use Asus ProArt monitors. I've used BenQ monitors. Those are really good. There's a lot of options out there that aren't Flanders Scientific. Of course, Flanders Scientific is the best of the best, and Sony has really high-end monitors that are the best of the best, and Canon does as well. You just have to see what works for you and what fits your budget, what fits the jobs you're working on. So, tips and tricks. Learn about the color wheel. That's a really big, basic thing. Actually, when you're in Resolve and you see the lift, gamma, gain circles and dials, which is basically lift is shadows, gamma is midtones, and gain is highlights. So you'll see the color wheel embedded in those different tools. So you can manipulate all of those. So if you're in a warehouse and it's very green because they're using crappy fluorescence or LEDs or whatever, it'll show you this sway to blue, and on the other side of that is orange, and on the on the flip side you've got magenta and you've got green. I think it's the other way around. But the color wheel is important, and it's important not only for artists, but it's important for colorists. The Waveform monitor is probably my number one go-to tool in addition to the RGB parade. Those two really go hand in hand for me. I use the waveform monitor for overall contrast. I actually turn off the RGB visuals on the waveform monitor within Resolve because it really gives me a better idea of if the image were black and white, where's the whites, where's the blacks, where's the midtones, without bogging into the color data. And then I go to the RGB parade and I look at the color data. So usually I'll set contrast first, and I use the parade to set white balance, and that has worked for me for a long time. After I do those two things, I use the vector scope, which is a measurement of saturation, a visualization of your saturation. That's a really good tool for checking to make sure you haven't taken it too far. If you're coloring for broadcast and you go outside of, since it's a circle and it has different colors at each point like this, those little squares where they're just visually in the vector scope, if you go outside of those bounding boxes, you are outside of broadcast safe. That's changing. That's not as big a deal anymore, but it is a pretty good indicator of if your vector scope is showing that red is far outside of this bounding box area, you're probably overly saturated. Same for green, magenta, whatever you want. It's a pretty good tool to make sure you stay in a good place saturation wise. So those three scopes are, a super big deal to me. They are a way for me to not rely on my eyes fully, since, as we know, our eyeballs change white balance all the time, and it's a way for me to double check myself. I'm not a big fan of LUTs. They are not a one-size-fits-all solution. A lot of people buy them and sell them, and for some people it works really well. But if I'm going to use a LUT, I'm going to use it a camera manufacturer's LUT for that camera, for the color space it was shooting in, to Rec 709. Aside from that, I like to use these two hands and make my color happen in Resolve, and I can actually, instead of sending a LUT, if I need to send something and the other person's using Resolve, you can send them a still, and that maintains all the nodes and structures, so everyone can just make adjustments on the existing nodes and not lose any information. That being said, LUTs do fulfill the solution of, I can send this from editor to editor in Premiere, yada yada yada, but it's not a perfect solution. I find them very limiting and unpredictable, so I rarely use them. If things have changed, please let me know. As far as inspiration goes, I'm not a guy who's seen all the classic movies. I'm not a guy who breaks down color grading to its essence for the things that I watch, but I am a person who watches a lot of television and just absorbs where grading was and where grading is. If you look at it from a high level, you might watch something that was shot on film versus something that was shot digitally, or like Mad Men, which went from film to digital. You can see how things changed, and a lot of things did change. I just watch a lot of TV, and sometimes I put on a movie, but really I watch a lot of TV, and that's what inspires me. Sometimes I'll see something really awesome, color grading wise, and I will really try to figure out what happened there. But usually it's just keeping a benchmark of what's happening now, what's happening in the modern color sphere. And part of that is watching the ads. I spend a lot of time, if I do focus on an ad, it's focusing on how it was shot and how it was graded. That is where the change happens the most, really. So you start seeing some trends happening, and then you start seeing them changing again. But, as a colorist, it's really important for any creative endeavor, for any creative career, it's important to keep up. So watch those ads, watch those shows, see what other people are doing. Thank you for watching my masterclass. I had a lot of fun making it, and I hope you learned a lot watching it. If you're curious, have some questions, or are interested in connecting, find me on LinkedIn. You can just search for my name. It's very unique. So I'm the only one you'll find. And you can see my website on there. You can send me a message, ask me a question, whatever works. And of course, good luck. Good luck becoming a colorist. You can do it.